everyone, and welcome to First Days with Johanna. I'm Johanna. We are back here in my studio in south of Sweden. This is the place where I dye my yarn, I create patterns for you, and of course I also record these videos that are going up on YouTube, and I record all of my online courses and tech tutorials. So if you want to know more about that, then check out the links below, where you can find the link to my Facebook group, where we at the moment are having a sock program during the summer. We will knit socks together and you get to set your own goals. And this kicked off June 1st and is going until August 31st. So there is still a lot of time. There will be some prizes at the end of each month. So we're coming up on a few more weeks, and then we will have a little bit of a prize going out at the end of June. But this video is not going to be a normal video. I'm going to talk a little bit about test knitting. Test knitting is something that you can see that designers ask for many times. And designers want to have their pattern test knitted so that they know that the instructions are clear, that there aren't any mistakes, and of course that they have calculated the yarn requirements correct. Because that is always something that you are trying to figure out, and you really don't want someone knitting your design run out of yarn halfway through. That will be a terrible thing. So that's why one of the reasons the patterns get test knitted. It's also nice to see that your design can work in different yarns and in different maybe colors, maybe structures, maybe sizes. So it's important to have a big size variety when it comes to test knitters, so that you know that each size gets tested and proven that it will work. And test knitters also a little bit help the designers to make the patterns clear, to make them easy to understand. And I mean, if the test knitter has a question, then probably many knitters will have that question. So it's good to listen and to make the things clear that the test knitters are coming back with feedback on. So do you think that test knitting is something for you? Well, I will say that the test knitter have about 5 things that are more important than other. A test knitter, okay, we start by number 1 here. A test knitter should be able to knit a pattern as written, not coming up with own ideas and own improvements. The pattern needs to be as it is, and I'm really not the greatest at that. You have seen my test knits for Yarnisty, and there's always a little bit of a tweak, but so far I think she's okay with it. She haven't come back to me and said, no, don't do like that. But yeah, check with the designer if it's okay if you do a small change in order to make sure that it might fit you or fit whoever you are knitting for. The changes I made was actually to make sure that I had enough yarn for my project, and that was one of the things. You remember the socks that my puppy Molly found, and yeah, at the top there I had to bind off in a different color because I ran out of yarn. And that was something that we discussed back and forth to make sure that everyone else had enough yarn for the biggest size of socks that I knit. So that was also, it was a great way and a great discussion between me and the designer. But make sure, if you want to be a test knitter, that you can follow a pattern and You won't take too big of steps outside of the pattern as written. A few things, yes, maybe, but check before so it's okay with the designer. Number 2, you need to be able to knit according to a deadline. If the thought of a deadline stresses you out, then don't test knit. You have a deadline and somehow you need to fit the knitting into that deadline and make sure that you can do the absolute best of it and do whatever you can. I know I've been late on the last few test knits that I have done. I managed to do 1 sock in the time limit, and that's a great way to actually test all the numbers, is to only make 1 sock. That depends on the designer's requirements. Sometimes for a sock knitting, it's okay if you knit 1 sock, you don't have to complete 2. And in my case, that have been true. So check your requirements. Check if the deadline is a really hard deadline, or if it's okay if you squeeze a little bit on if maybe you can get it a little bit later. But make sure that knitting for a deadline does not stress you out, because that is the worst thing. You sit there and you wonder, how am I going to do all of this knitting before that deadline? And that is all you can think about, and it stresses you out. And knitting aren't supposed to be stressful. We knit because it keeps us happy, it keeps us in a sense of a way healthy, because it clears our mind. It's great for almost meditation. And if you add the stress of a deadline, if that is something that stresses you, then knitting will become terrible. And that is not the way it's supposed to be. Number 3 on that list. If the thought of having to frog your project really freaks you out, then don't test knit. It happens. There can be design faults, there can be math that doesn't add up. You need to be able to frog it back, to start from the beginning again and be happy about it. If that happens, that's gonna stress the designer too a lot, and it's not something that is asked, I don't know, lightly or something. It's a really big decision if the designer asks you to, please can you frog that and start from the beginning. That means that it's something terribly wrong with the design, and that's not the way either the designer or you would like to have it. So it's not the end of the world if you have to frog your project, but it's not something that it's not taken too easily if the designer asks you for it. Number 4, you are detail oriented. If you have an eye for the details, you can easily spot mistakes in a pattern, or if you can see that this line does not add up, and you can see all of those things, then test knitting could be something for you. It depends on the rest of the things, but detail oriented is a really great thing to have when you are test knitting. That means that you can see all of those little small tiny mistakes that can creep into a pattern that no one noticed. And you can see that the patterns are following each other, that you have used the same font, or you use the same punctuation or anything like that. And that really helps the designer, because sometimes when you have looked at that pattern for far too long, you can't see it anymore. So fresh eyes is really good, and that is something that test knitters provide to the designer, and it's a big help when it comes to knitting the patterns. Number 5, one of the biggest things when it comes to test knitting. You are not afraid to speak up about unclear passages in the pattern, about mistakes, about pointing out some errors or something. If you can find them, but don't communicate them to the designer, then that's no help. You need to be able to communicate with the designer and make sure that they understand what the issue is, and that you don't have to have the solution. You just have to have the eye to see that it's not correct and to be able to communicate it back to the designer. Because sometimes that is the most, it's not sometimes the most important, it is the most important part. To be able to get the feedback, and to be able to get the feedback so that you can understand it and so that you can help everyone else with that feedback that you get and provide it into the pattern and make it clearer for everyone else. Most test knitters, they knit in their spare time. They are not paid to test knit the patterns. They sometimes get a discount on yarn they can use for that pattern, or they sometimes get a pattern from the designer from their back catalog, but it's not something that you most of the time can do for money. I'm speaking for the indie designers at this point. I don't know if the bigger firms have test knitters for their pattern and if they are able to provide some kind of payment for their test knitters. In my case, I offer a big discount on yarn if you test knit my patterns, and it's not restricted to only the yarn that you can use for that pattern. I offer it across my range. So if you are a test knitter for me, then you will get a discount on yarn. You will get the pattern that you are test knitting, and it's also really fun and really social to be a part of a test knitting group, and you can discuss the pattern back and forth and come up with great solutions for it. Now, when I've said all that, of course, I have a pattern that I want to send out to the world into test knitting. This pattern is the socks that you have seen me work on the last couple of weeks, and if not, I will present them here. I have finally given them a name because it's just been the socks that doesn't have any name, but now they do. And I managed to finish both of the socks for this recording. I know that this yarn is not the best yarn for my pattern. I will be knitting up a second pair in a much better yarn, but sometimes that happens. When I start designing, it's often just on the fly and I want to try something out. So I just grabbed the yarn, grabbed my needles, and this pair of socks I've actually knitted a lot on during shows. So it was something that popped into my head while I was standing there on my first Christmas market. And yeah, it's evolved since that point of time. And now I have a pair of socks to show you. Of course, I'm talking about these socks here. They have this zigzag motif going down on, let's see if I can do both of them like this, on the outside of the foot, and continue up on the leg of the sock. Now you can see that it's supposed to be like this. So this pattern is for a right foot and a left foot. So there is a little bit of a difference, but not that much. Once you have the pattern down, it's quite easy to understand what you need to do. It's an 8-row repeat of the pattern, so it's not that many rows to figure out, and it's easy and memorable because most of it is the same from row to row. This pair is knitted toe up with a fleagle heel and The ribbing is a twisted 1x1 rib, but the pattern actually continues all the way up to the bind off. So there's a little bit less ribbing on top compared to a normal pair of socks because the pattern continues all the way up. These socks will have the name Find a Way because these zigzags, they remind me of like a crooked road or something that sometimes you need to take before you know what to do, or yeah, before you know where to go, what to do, and there will always be a way that is the best for you, even if you find it crooked, but you will for sure find a way. So this pattern will be test knitted, and hopefully I can release the pattern in end of July. If you want to apply for test knitting these socks, there will be a link below into a Google form that you fill out before 12th of June 2022. Make sure to do that, and I will get in contact with everyone that fills out the form and everyone that is chosen to be test knitters, because I will have a limited number, so make sure to fill out and sign up if you're interested. I have my little sheety note down here, and since it was actually more of an educational video about test knitting and not so much about just talking about what I was knitting on, I needed to have that. But I think I actually covered it all at this point of time. I want to even before I let you go, I want to take you out in our garden today too. It will be a little bit of show off of my asparagus. We have one bed of asparagus, and asparagus is a different plant, if you can say it like that. It's perennial, so it comes back year after year, and one plant can last like 20 years almost. But before you can start harvest asparagus, they need to be at the same place for 2 or 3 years. And I had one plant that was turning 2 years this year. The rest of them I planted last year, so I couldn't harvest from them, and I could only harvest a little bit from the first plant. So even if it's mid-season of asparagus at the moment, mine has actually gone into bloom, and it looks delicate and happy, and yeah, it's something that you can't really see in the shops, because asparagus in the shops, it's just these green things, or white if it's covered up as they grow, so they grow underground. But the green things, and they don't have the really delicate flowers on them, but you can't see them because you only eat the sprouts. You don't eat the flowers of the asparagus. So a little bit about that from my garden. So here is my asparagus. As you can see, it's taller than I am, and it's not that small sprouts anymore. And you can see all of these delicate flowers going on. It mostly looks like a big mess when I do like this, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I want to say we have 6 of them here, and they are all in full bloom. And next year I can even harvest a little bit more asparagus, but this year I think we are done because I don't want to stress the plant so it won't survive. Last weekend I finally sorted all of these plant boxes, so they are now sowed with all of different kinds. We have beans, we have carrots, we have a lot of things in here, but this is a white mussel winter squash. We had it last year and it was so good to use all through winter, and it keeps really well when harvested, so you don't have to do anything with it right after harvest. We kept it indoors and free from moisture and frost and stuff, and we could use it through till January. I think we'll use the last one. And my son actually thought that it looked kind of ghost-like when it laid on the table, but yeah, he wanted to decorate them for Halloween. Let's see if we can grow a few more so he actually can do that this year. Here we have some blooming farm beans, and you can see the ants have found its way, so we have some lice up here that I need to take care about. That's not the thing that I want in my plants. So it was good that I went here to film these plants, but they are blooming with white and black flowers here, and hopefully I can get the lice under control so we actually can harvest beans later on this summer. That was a little bit of garden update for this week. I wish you all a happy week and happy knitting. Bye!